For this part of the program, I'm going to introduce to you former Congressman Jim Colby, a Bretton Woods Committee member who is going to be accepting along the way greater responsibilities with us. And he will present our principal speaker to you. Jim Colby served his native state of Arizona in the Congress for 22 years. 20 of it on the Appropriations Committee, the last 6 of which he chaired the Foreign Ops Subcommittee, which did the financing for Function 150, and in the process learned a lot about the IFIs, maybe more than they wanted him to learn. But at any rate, Jim now is a scholar at the German Marshall Fund. He is, in fact, he's a transatlantic fellow, I believe he is addressed as. He also works at a variety of other tasks, including with the McClarty Group. And he is getting more active in the Bretton Woods Committee. And I'm pleased to present to you my friend, Congressman Jim Colby.
Thank you, Bill. That was a nice way of reminding me that I promised to be more active here and not to fall down on my responsibilities. We don't want to make the introduction of the introducer longer than the introduction of the person who's speaking here. So let me just say it's really a great pleasure for me to be with my former colleague here today, Bob Menendez. You know, it's been said that Bob's story is really the quintessential American story of the American dream. He's son of immigrants. He grew up in a tenement building in Union City. Today, he's one of the 100 United States senators. But I think the background has never left him. The background has shaped the man we see before us here today. An individual who has always been interested not only in doing the right thing, but helping those who are less fortunate. I had the pleasure to serve with Bob for 15 years in the House, where I always found him to be a tough but a very fair negotiator when it came to working legislation. Since he came to the Senate in 2006, and when he was appointed to the United States Senate in 2006, just shortly before I left the U.S. Congress, in this capacity he's really gained a lot of national attention for his leadership and reform of the country's intelligence, its security, its public health systems, and the work he has done to implement the 9/11 Commission's national security recommendations. He's one of 3 Latino members of the Senate, and in that capacity he continues to provide a very strong voice for laying out a vision of how the Latino community can help America prosper. It's a pleasure for me today to introduce somebody that I have known and come to admire and respect greatly, Senator Bob Menendez. Bob.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. Bueno, gracias, Jim, por esa bella introducción. Le agradezco y estar aquí con Bretton Woods. And for those of you who may be terrorized that I might continue for the next few minutes in Spanish, let me say I appreciate Jim's gracious introduction. I appreciate his service to our country and certainly his time in the House together and his continuing engagement. Let me thank you all very much for your invitation to the Bretton Woods Committee co-chairs, Jim Wolferson and Bill Frenzel, to the members of the committee, to all of you who have joined together today. I'm honored to join an impressive list of speakers, among others, President Jim Young Kim of the World Bank, Christine Lagarde of the International Monetary Fund, my good friend Lael Brainard, who I think is doing an exceptional job as the Undersecretary of the Treasury, and the many experts and innovators eminently qualified to address this year's theme of ending poverty in a generation. As the new chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I'm honored to speak to such a distinguished audience of international investors in human potential. The first trip I took in my new role as chairman was to Afghanistan and Pakistan. The second was to developing countries in Central America. and appropriately, my first major speech since assuming the chairmanship is here at the Bretton Woods Conference, joined by leaders from around the globe, who are committed to the hard work of challenging the status quo and rethinking about how best to improve the lives of millions through smarter, enlightened international economic cooperation. Though I bring about 20 years of foreign policy experience to my new role as chairman, it is a new beginning for me and a transitional time for one of the Senate's most venerable and longest-standing committees. Its chairmen have traditionally been the most senior senators, but we all know that dramatic change can come rapidly in the new world in which we live, even in the United States Senate. In fact, my colleague, Senator Bob Corker, and I are the first ranking member and chairman who did not serve on the committee, let alone in the U.S. Senate, in the 20th century. It is indeed a new committee for a new century, with many newly elected members who hold diametrically opposed, often highly charged views about the proper role of the United States in the world. And perhaps more importantly, the issues we face have never been more immediate or changeable. We've never had such challenges nor such opportunities for a paradigm shift in our thinking. We can make a difference on the issues that affect all of us: the interconnectivity of people and nations, the clash between internationalism and isolationism, the need for sustainable development, adapting global economic governance structures to an ever-changing world, the confluence of economic and national security, and the importance of fostering new democracies. The fact is, every so often, the United States faces defining moments in foreign policy, critical junctures that come at times of great upheaval and change, when the old order gives way, sometimes painfully, often searchingly, when old rules no longer apply, and a new, if unfamiliar, order arises from the chaos. The genius of the post-World War II order was that our leaders reached a shared vision of the threats that the world faced, and then developed a long-term strategy to address them. Born out of Bretton Woods, they created a web of complementary institutions, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, NATO, that allowed the United States and Europe to exercise leadership in a way that was respected, not resented. We face such a juncture today, and the stakes could not be higher, nor the potential rewards greater. I come to the chairmanship of foreign relations as two wars are coming to an end at a great cost in lives and national treasure. This is indeed a defining moment in the history of democracy, in the global economy, in governmental and economic institutions, in societies in which people are demanding change and reforms while still coping with age-old sectarian violence, still struggling with health and educational inadequacies, hunger, poverty, disease, not to mention the need for women's rights, civil liberties, and basic freedoms. The question is, can we match the vision and commitment to bold actions in this century that the leaders who gathered at Bretton Woods almost 70 years ago showed in the last, creating international institutions which brought prosperity to millions and changed the world? Frankly, as the son of Cuban immigrants who couldn't afford the books I needed to go to school in a different life, had my mother not brought my family here from Cuba, I would be standing before you, not as one of 100 United States senators or as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but as a client. So I know what you do. I know the importance of what everyone in this room does at its most basic level. I understand it. I feel it. My mother lived it. And I know what it means in the lives of millions today. Imagine a world without the IMF or the World Bank, without the leaders in this room who have the foresight to bring institutions forward and develop innovative economic and social policies in an increasingly interconnected world that is no longer just flat, as Tom Friedman has written, but beyond flat, totally and immediately connected. This interconnectivity presents new opportunities for all of us to use the tools of a global village to reach further. For me as chairman, it is to promote the work of the committee and the economic and national security benefits of a new internationalism. For all of you, it's an opportunity to bring the old models forward for a new and fresh round of multilateral cooperation. I think about our collective challenge, and it reminds me of a favorite passage from Dr. King. On his birthday in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King painted a prescient portrait of the world, possibly more meaningful today than it was 46 years ago when he said it. And remember his quote in the context of 46 years ago, but I think it's very prescient. Let me paraphrase it, but still do it justice. He said it really boils down to this. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Did you ever stop to think that you can't leave for your job in the morning without being dependent on most of the world? You get up in the morning and you reach for a sponge, and that's handed to you by a Pacific Islander. And then you go into the kitchen to drink your coffee for the morning, and that's poured into your cup by a South American. And maybe you want tea, and that's poured into your cup by a Chinese. Or maybe you're desirous of having cocoa for breakfast, and that's poured into your cup by a West African. And before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half of the world. He concluded, we're not going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. And I would only add to bring his concept into the 21st century. When you get to work, the engineering report that you might have on your desk was created in India and sent back to the United States. A radiologist report read by your doctor at your local hospital, created in Northern Ireland. Or if you have a problem with your credit card, as I recently did, there was some charge on a bar I've never been. But by the size of the charge, I wish I had been there because it must have been one heck of a party, but it wasn't mine. And when I called the company to complain about the charge, I ended up with a call center in South Africa. In the pursuit of human capital for the creation of a product or delivery of service, we have certain global realities that exist more today than at any other time. Dr. King was right. I don't believe we will be at peace until we recognize that we are all interrelated and find a way for each of us to work together for the betterment of all of us. Frankly, the American Congress is having trouble in this regard. We are locked in a political battle between the internationalists on one side and new isolationists on the other. Thankfully, just last month, proposals to cut the international affairs budget by $15 billion, a full 33%, were defeated, as were attempts to reduce aid to Egypt and prohibit all funds for the United Nations. These votes send a clear message to the new isolationists in the Senate that America will accept its international leadership role in meeting the new challenges we face. But clearly the lines are drawn, especially, for example, when it comes to treaties. Meeting the challenge of creating a nexus between our national interests and the hopes and expectations of the global community will mean convincing a majority of Americans that treaties do not entangle the United States. They empower us to achieve our interests and reflect the very best of our traditions and ideals. They give voice to the voiceless and protect the most vulnerable, women, children, the disabled. As chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I take seriously our advice and consent responsibilities, and I look forward to working closely with colleagues to advance a treaty agenda that protects U.S. values and leadership in the 21st century. Meeting the challenge of creating that nexus between our interests and the aspirations, for example, of the people of Latin America will take a new era of economic statecraft with a guiding, well-articulated principle. This is a region that, from trade to transnational crime, remains incredibly important to us and to our mutual, immediate, and long-term economic well-being. I intend to make it a priority to create strong, long-term partnerships that bring financial and opportunity resources to bear to help nations complete strategic projects that benefit people throughout the hemisphere. I would hope that we would streamline systems and work towards new partnerships for economic growth. But it will take a commitment to the kind of economic statecraft that creates pure opportunity through well-paying direct jobs, well-paying indirect jobs, and long-term business creation. A highway allows a farmer to get his milk to market. A water treatment plant allows a farmer to export vegetables. A fiber optics cable allows a rural community to learn new techniques to market its products. And these investments create new customers and economic opportunities here at home as well. That said, one of the major challenges we face is modifying institutions and integrating emerging countries based on shared norms. Emerging economic powers, Brazil, China, India, have been increasingly vocal that the IFI's governance and quota systems should be adapted to better represent a world where dynamic, fast-growing countries drive growth and development in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Our combined response has been impressive and inspired in some ways, in other ways, not so much. To the great credit of the leaders of the G7 and G8 countries, we realized these groups were insufficient to deal with global economic, political, and security developments. So we created the G20. And while the G20 is hardly perfect, it ensures that global economic decision-making reflects the new economic reality and recognizes a world with India, for example, at a GDP of 1.15 trillion and 1.15 billion people, not just Canada at $1.4 trillion and 33 million people. I'm well aware of the debate whether the IMF and World Bank reforms agreed to in 2010 go far enough. Certainly from the perspective of the emerging economies, they do not, but one thing at a time. I realize that the U.S. Congress has a job to do, and it starts in the Senate with my committee. Bottom line, we can either choose to make reforms that accommodate emerging market economies and bring them into mechanisms and norms, or risk that they seek to play by their own rules. So I pledge to make this a priority for this year, and will ensure the Foreign Relations Committee fulfills its responsibility to review and act on the administration's requests. However, I will be looking to many of you, and Jim, to you and others who have experience in the Congress to help explain to my colleagues in Congress and to the American people the IMF's important role in preserving American jobs and helping to prevent economic crises from causing political instability, escalating to armed conflict, and threatening our national security. Making the nexus is going to be very important in our advocacy to get the votes that will be necessary. And when it comes to national security, the threats that we face are clearly evolving. The response to violent extremist groups must go far beyond hard power alone. Global development matters. The key principles of good governance, democracy, and transparency matter. Supporting people at the most basic level, their lives, their livelihoods, matters. Civic engagement matters. Promotion of the rule of law, all of it matters to international peace and stability. But we can't just talk about these principles as though they are unattainable ideals. We must genuinely invest in them and commit to them. Many of the same questions that drive engines of global development should also drive our approach to national security issues. When it comes to extremism, we have to refine our efforts to understand and address root causes, not simply rely on tactical responses that only target the symptoms of terrorism. Targeting the recruitment pipeline must be a core focus of our counterterrorism efforts from here on out. And that means understanding and working together to respond to people's fundamental grievances. In this interconnected world, partnerships are more important than ever, and we need to strengthen existing relationships and build new alliances. They are our greatest asset. France's efforts in Mali, Turkey's role in Somalia, Jordan's support for refugees from Syria, all essential partnerships in our counterterrorism efforts. We know now more than ever that we cannot counter violent extremist threats alone. We must leverage all of our resources, including the incredible work of the Department of State and USAID to build the capacity of frontline states. In my view, everything we do to increase economic security and foster democracy in emerging states is an investment in national security as well. We have already seen what happens when you lift the lid on countries eager to bring forth democratic movements. The Arab Spring has created historic challenges, but also historic opportunities for us to rethink our engagement in these countries. These transitions belong to the people of these countries. It is up to them to fulfill the promises of their revolution, but it's up to us to continue to engage and to provide meaningful assistance. First, we must also support and promote minority voices and ensure that they are not marginalized and are fully represented. Second, we need to reach out to civil society groups to help democracies take root and grow. Third, we need to consider targeted economic assistance programs. Unemployment among youth is one of the biggest challenges and potential threats we have. If the IFI community must continue to work with countries, for example, like Egypt, to support economic development, harness available talent, and help translate it into long-term growth. On my recent trip to Central America, I saw how weak institutions leave citizens susceptible to crime and violence. So-called soft power or smart power brings resources to bear to tackle this problem. But we need to fortify and expand our relationships in the region to mitigate security challenges, widespread government corruption, and the presence of transnational criminal organizations. By way of example, in Mexico, through the Mérida Initiative, we work closely with the Mexican government to target the root causes of crime and violence, one of which is economic vulnerability. But without economic opportunity, young people may see their best option as drugs or contraband, cartels and gangs, or in the Middle East, a young, poor, hopeless person on the Arab street may be radicalized. The international financial institutions may not be the ones doing the large drug busts or dismantling criminal organizations or capturing terrorists, but they are the ones investing in human capital and creating more opportunities and more jobs for more families and young people in search of a better future in an interconnected world of Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, and YouTube. Whatever else we do, we must embrace the tools of the new century if we are to keep our institutions and our solutions relevant. So yes, the world is changing, from China's rise economically and its expansion to turbulence in the Middle East. It is increasingly clear that existing international institutions and arrangements are often throwbacks to the 20th century and have not caught up to the 21st century. As the largest contributor to the international financial arrangements and institutions, the United States has a greater stake than most in making sure these arrangements and institutions remain relevant and equal to the task at hand. Imagine how much worse the global financial crisis would have been had the IMF not been organized or equipped to coordinate a series of substantive economic actions on a global scale. Evidence suggests those actions worked. Global trade and investments have begun to recover from 2008 levels. Financial institutions have readjusted and reset to accommodate changes in the distribution of power. Confronted in recent years with one of the most challenging economic tests in history, the IFI has helped stabilize markets and economies. For this reason, among others, increasing the United States quota in the IMF is not just about spending money. It is about investing in our national security and future prosperity. Today, the IMF and the World Bank are taking on burdens unimagined at the end of the last century, unimagined even a decade ago. And in each of these cases, they have played a critical role. They have lifted millions out of poverty, attacked corruption, promoted health initiatives that have led to increased prosperity, more economic security. This has all been done, I would say, with an impressive return on investment for contributing countries. That said, if we have to ask if economic security translates into national security, and if it all begins potentially in one investment in one small village where there is one human resource, one idea, and one muddy road to the marketplace, why is there opposition to increasing support to the IMF? We know it not only takes a village,
It is a village, a global village. And in that village, the walls have been coming down. A former Secretary of State, William Rogers, said, "The world of the future will not flourish behind walls, no matter who builds them and no matter what their purpose. A world divided economically must inevitably be a world divided politically." Now, I would only add that I know what opportunities can arise when walls come down and human potential is given a chance to flourish. Our strength lies in the dream that is this nation, where a boy who grows up poor in a tenement in New Jersey, the son of immigrants, can rise to be the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That reality, that dream, is the reason why many more people around the world aspire to be like us than conspire against us. We all know that supporting people, communities, and nations means that we not only grow food for a rural community in Afghanistan or send girls to school in sub-Saharan Africa, but that we work together to build lasting friendships, open new roads to the marketplace, to diminish the power of our enemies with a robust presence that unleashes human potential and creates stability and prosperity around the world and here at home. This is our charge. This is our challenge. This is the future we are called upon to shape. Thank you very much for having me with you, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in the days ahead.
Thank you. All right, you're going to have to go. I'm just going to thank you. Hold on just one second here. Unfortunately, Senator Menendez has a pressing engagement on Capitol Hill and won't be able to stay with us. So we'd ask you to stay in your seats for just a moment while he departs. But please join with me in giving him one more round of thanks. I think we all agree that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is in good hands after the departure of Senator Kerry and with Senator Mendez there. And now I'd like to call on Richard Debs to come up here to close the morning session.
Well, it's time. We're going to continue our program over lunch, and it's time for that now. It'll be a buffet lunch. You can just follow our leaders out. And the program will continue with Lael Brainerd, who will be talking again on the subject of the United States' role vis-a-vis the Bretton Woods institutions. I think we've had a really stimulating, very good, constructive morning, and we'll look forward to more of it. We're all very pleased at how I am particularly pleased at what we heard from our last speaker, the senator, about the U.S. role and what he's trying to do through the Foreign Relations Committee. Anyway, thank you all, and we'll see you in the lunchroom.